The palace of the Alpha King rose like a dark jewel in the center of the kingdom, its towers piercing the sky like black spears. Every wall was carved with the faces of past rulers, stern and eternal, watching over the courtyard where the mating ceremony was held. Torches flickered along the stone paths, their light dancing over banners of crimson and gold. The air smelled of incense, iron, and anticipation, a mixture that tightened the chests of all who had come to witness the event. Inside the grand hall, women from every corner of the kingdom stood in silken gowns, their heads bowed and hearts trembling. Each had been chosen for beauty, grace, or noble blood, hoping to gain the favor of the Alpha King. And yet, as the ceremony began, the king's eyes swept over them with the cold, sharp precision of a hawk. One by one, they failed. They curtsied too low, smiled too widely, or spoke words that rang false. The Alpha King's expression remained unreadable, his judgment absolute. Murmurs ran through the crowd like a shadow, whispers that no woman had ever pleased him, not in decades. The doors at the far end of the hall opened with a deep, echoing creak. A hush fell. A woman entered, guided by a young attendant whose hands were gentle yet firm. She walked with calm certainty, her steps measured, her posture straight. She was blind, her eyes pale and unseeing, yet her head was held high as though she could see more than any of the others. She wore a simple gown of soft gray, unadorned with jewels or lace. Where the others tried to dazzle, she seemed to glow with quiet confidence. The Alpha King noticed her immediately. A flicker of curiosity passed through his dark eyes, a spark he had not felt in years. He leaned slightly forward, watching her approach. The courtiers tittered, exchanging incredulous glances. How could a blind woman hope to survive this trial, let alone please the king? Some whispered that she was foolish to try. Others wondered if her boldness would earn her pain instead of favor. She stopped a few paces from the throne, her head tilting slightly as though listening to the music that floated softly through the hall. The king's voice cut through the silence, deep and commanding. "Name yourself," he said, his tone both a demand and a challenge. "I am Lyra," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "I am here because the ceremony calls for me, but not to impress you with lies or flattery. I am here as I am." The words fell like stones in the hall. The courtiers gasped. The Alpha King's lips curved in a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk, but it did not reach his eyes. His power was absolute, yet something in her defiance unsettled him. No one had ever dared speak to him with such honesty, unshaken by fear. "Bold," he said slowly, almost tasting the word. "Do you understand what you risk?" "I do," Lyra replied. "But fear does not teach truth. Only courage does." A ripple of murmurs passed through the hall. Some were awed. Others were scandalized. The Alpha King rose from his throne, towering and imperious. His cloak of black silk swept the floor as he descended the steps, his gaze fixed on the blind woman. "Then we shall see if your courage is enough," he said. The ceremony required movement, ritual, and gestures of devotion. Each woman before Lyra had performed them flawlessly in appearance, yet the king had rejected them all. Now he watched her closely. Lyra did not bend or twirl. She did not try to catch the king's eye with smiles or elaborate gestures. She simply stood, listening to the rhythm of the hall and the silent pulse of the king's presence. "Step forward," he commanded, testing her. She obeyed, moving gracefully though her eyes could not see. Her senses seemed to guide her, attuned to the faint vibrations of the floor, the warmth of the torches, and the rhythm of the music. Her hand brushed against the sleeve of the attendant, yet she moved with confidence, not dependence. "Most women think they must dazzle me to survive," the king said, circling her slowly. "They think beauty, flattery, or fear can bend my will, but you are different." "I do not seek to bend you," Lyra said. "I seek only to understand." "And to be understood." The king paused, intrigued. His eyes, dark and stormy, narrowed as he studied her. This was no ordinary woman. There was something in the way she moved, the way she breathed, and the way she spoke. A quiet certainty that seemed to pierce through his centuries of guarded authority. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Curiosity mixed with unease and perhaps an acknowledgement of longing he had long denied. The courtiers held their breath as he stepped closer. The blind Omega raised her chin slightly, her face calm and unreadable. She did not flinch, and that defiance made the king's pulse quicken. He had grown used to obedience, to fear, to submission. She offered none of these. "Tell me," he said, his voice softer now, almost unsteady. How do you see me? Lyra smiled faintly, a smile that held no arrogance, only understanding. Not with eyes, she said. I see you with your heart, your fears, and your solitude. I see the man behind the crown, the burden behind the throne. The hall fell silent. Even the guards stopped their movements. Such words had never been spoken to the Alpha King, not in all the generations he had ruled. A shiver ran through him, a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and something he dared not name. You speak boldly, he said, his tone a mix of warning and wonder. Do you know the danger of speaking truths to a king? I do, Lyra replied. But danger does not frighten me. Only dishonesty does. The king's lips curved, but he made no sound. He stepped back, circling her again, studying her. His mind, trained to judge, could not find weakness. His power, so often absolute, could not shake her. For the first time in decades, he felt unsteady, unsure how to proceed. Then show me, he said finally. Show me who you are, Lyra. Show me what courage looks like. She took a deep breath and began to move, slowly at first, then with confidence. She did not perform the ceremonies of courtly grace. She did not bow to tradition. She moved as she felt, her motions gentle but precise, each gesture revealing a truth about herself, the court, and the man who watched. She spoke not with words but with presence, with an authenticity that resonated in the silence of the hall. The Alpha King felt something stir deep within him. He had seen countless women perform before him, but none had reached him like this. None had touched the parts of him that were hidden even from himself. The courtiers whispered, wide-eyed, unable to comprehend that the king's expression had softened, that a shadow of awe crossed his face. As Lyra concluded her movement, she bowed her head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of the moment, of the space between them, of the truth she had dared to show. The king stepped forward, his heart pounding in a way it had not in years. Who taught you to see me like this? He asked, his voice low and almost a whisper. Lyra lifted her face, a small, knowing smile on her lips. No one, she said. I have only listened. The hall erupted into murmurs again, but the king did not hear them. He was focused entirely on her. For the first time, the weight of his crown felt different. Not oppressive, but full of possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine. He had met many women, commanded many, feared none. Yet this blind woman, the Omega, had changed something fundamental in him. He stepped back to the throne, yet his gaze never left her. Very well, he said finally. The ceremony continues. But know this. You intrigue me, Lyra, and that is no small feat. Lyra's smile deepened just slightly, a quiet promise and challenge in one. She had survived the first test, but neither of them knew how the next steps of this strange, perilous connection would unfold. Outside, the torches flickered, casting long shadows over the courtyard. The Alpha King and the blind Omega stood, eyes locked, two forces meeting at the edge of destiny. The crowd waited, breathless, sensing that history was about to bend in a way it had never bent before. And in that moment, a silent, unspoken question lingered in the air. Who would truly bend first, the king or the Omega? The following morning, the palace was shrouded in a mist that clung to the towers and winding streets like a soft silver veil. Courtiers whispered among themselves about the previous night's ceremony. Every eye had been fixed on Lyra, the blind Omega who had dared to defy the Alpha King. No one had seen him so unsettled, so intrigued by a single woman. Some said she had bewitched him, others murmured that she was dangerous, but all agreed she had changed something within him. In the king's private chambers, a room of polished black stone and velvet curtains, he stood before a large mirror. His reflection, so often a reminder of power and authority, seemed hollow this morning. His dark eyes lingered on the faint, mysterious smile that Lyra had carried through the ceremony. It haunted him, unrelenting and insistent. He had known solitude, feared companionship, yet now curiosity and unfamiliar ache tugged at him. He summoned her. When Lyra arrived, escorted by her loyal attendant, she moved through the chamber with calm grace, her white hair catching the dim light. The king watched her approach, the rhythm of her steps steady and unafraid. This time there was no grand audience. The court was gone. The walls seemed to hold only their presence. Sit, the king commanded, his voice soft yet firm. Lyra obeyed, resting on the cushion across from him. She did not flinch under his gaze, nor did she try to impress him. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken tension until he finally spoke. "You did not perform as the ceremony demanded," he said, pacing slowly before her. "Most would have trembled. Most would have lied to survive, and yet, you did not." "I do not fear truth," Lyra replied, "and I do not wish to survive by hiding who I am. That is all." The king stopped mid-step, studying her carefully. "You speak of truth as though it is a weapon," he said, "but it is also a vulnerability." Lyra tilted her head. "Vulnerability is not weakness. It is strength when one chooses to embrace it rather than hide behind fear." For a long moment he said nothing. He had ruled this kingdom with power, with fear, and with cunning. He had crushed rebels, commanded armies, and silenced rivals. Yet this woman, blind and seemingly fragile, challenged him in ways no sword or decree ever could. "You see things differently," he murmured. "You see what others cannot, and that frightens me." "I see you," she said softly. "Not the crown, not the man everyone fears, but the loneliness behind the throne. The weight you carry. I see that you are tired, and yet you must always appear untouchable." He frowned, taken aback by her insight. Few had dared to look beneath his exterior, and none had spoken so plainly. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "Why reveal your understanding when it could endanger you?" "Because understanding is not weakness," Lyra said. "Because I have nothing to gain from false flattery, and I know the heart of a man who rules with both strength and sorrow. You are not just a king, and I am not just a woman." The king's eyes darkened, a storm brewing within them. He felt the pull of her words, the weight of their truth. For decades he had built walls around himself, walls of steel, of fear, of solitude. But here was a force he could not resist, gentle yet unyielding, honest yet daring. His mind, trained in strategy and command, could not predict her next move, and that unpredictability fascinated him. "You speak boldly," he said at last, "yet I sense more than words. You challenge me, and I cannot decide if I should admire or punish you." Lyra leaned forward slightly, her hands resting calmly in her lap. "I am not here to challenge you. I am here to see if there is a man behind the mask of the king. If he exists, perhaps he can find a way to meet me. Not in power, but in truth." Her words, like soft flames, began to thaw the icy barriers he had maintained for so long. He realized, with a mix of fear and desire, that he had never known anyone like her. She did not obey out of fear, nor did she bend to tradition. She stood firmly in who she was, and that alone demanded his attention. "You are unlike any woman I have known," he admitted, his voice low. "Your blindness, it does not make you fragile. It sharpens you. You see more than others because you are not blinded by appearances." Lyra's lips curved in a faint smile. "And you, king, are blinded by your own power. You judge all with fear, yet you are not afraid of me. That is rare." The king's jaw tightened. He had spent years controlling every aspect of the court, of his life, yet here she was, defying him with no weapon but her truth. The court had failed to impress him with beauty and flattery, but Lyra impressed him by refusing to play the game. A long silence fell, and the sound of the palace seemed to recede until there was only the quiet breathing of two souls in a vast, shadowed room. The king realized reluctantly that he was learning something new, not from strategy books or advisors, but from this blind Omega who dared to look him in the heart. "You understand much," he said finally, pacing again, "and yet you do not fear me. That unsettles me more than any army ever could." "I do not fear what is not cruel," Lyra said simply. "And I do not bow to that which cannot see my truth." The king paused near a tall window, the rising sun casting long shadows over the stone floor. He could not see the world as she did, nor could he understand fully the clarity she possessed, and yet he felt it, an undeniable connection, a spark that threatened to unravel the walls he had so carefully built. "Very well," he said at last, turning to her. "You will remain here for now. Not as a servant, not as a prisoner, but as a companion of sorts. We will see if your courage continues when the eyes of the court return. For now you intrigue me too much to dismiss." Lyra inclined her head gracefully. "I will remain, king, not to please you but to be present in truth." The king regarded her silently. There was a dangerous beauty in her defiance, in her unwavering calm. He had ruled by fear for decades, yet he found himself drawn to someone who wielded no power but honesty. Days passed. The palace, once rigid with ceremony and formality, began to shift subtly. Lyra moved through corridors and gardens, speaking with servants, learning the rhythms of the court, and observing the king without intrusion. She saw the small moments he tried to hide, the way his hand trembled when reading a report, the quiet sigh as he gazed at empty corridors, the way he listened when no one spoke, as if hearing ghosts of the past. The king, in turn, watched her. He could not decide whether he was fascinated or fearful, drawn or trapped. He began to test her, not with cruel games, but with questions, with challenges of perception and intuition. She never failed. She never flinched. And each success, each small act of insight, began to unravel a thread in his iron heart. One evening, in the palace gardens under the pale light of the moon, the king approached her as she traced her fingers along the edge of a fountain. The water shimmered, reflecting the stars above. "You see more than anyone else in this court," he said quietly. "Yet you are blind. How is that possible?" Lyra smiled faintly. "Because seeing is not only with the eyes, King. Seeing is with the heart, with the soul, with understanding. I see you because I listen, because I feel, and because I do not fear." The king stepped closer, close enough to feel her presence, to feel the energy that radiated from her even without sight. "And I do not understand it. I am not accustomed to this. No one has ever faced me like this. Perhaps because no one has ever truly tried to see you," she said softly. "Not the man behind the crown, not the burden behind the throne." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers and the soft rustle of leaves. The king's gaze remained fixed on her, and for the first time he felt vulnerable, not from enemies, not from war, but from a single, fearless woman who dared to meet him fully and without fear. The moment stretched, timeless and fragile. The courtiers, the palace, the rules of tradition, all faded into shadows. There were only two souls standing together under the moonlight, bound by an invisible thread of understanding and tension. The king's voice broke the silence, low and unsteady. "You are unlike any woman I have ever known, and yet I cannot dismiss you. Tell me, will your courage remain when all eyes are upon us again?" Lyra met his gaze, unafraid, unwavering. "I will remain, King, not for power, not for favor, but for truth, and for the man I see beneath the crown." The king felt an unfamiliar warmth rise within him, a mixture of admiration, fear, and longing. He had ruled for decades with strength, yet he was powerless before her honesty, and he realized, with a mixture of awe and unease, that the true challenge was only beginning. Outside, the moonlight bathed the palace in silver, shadows stretching and shifting as though the world itself waited. The Alpha King and the blind Omega stood together, two hearts meeting in defiance, curiosity, and undeniable tension. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew that the next steps would change everything. For Lyra had dared to see him fully, and the king, Alpha, ruler, and legend, was not sure he could resist the force of a truth he had never known. The palace had grown quieter since the ceremony. Courtiers moved with calculated steps, their whispers curling like smoke through the dim corridors. The Alpha King, usually a figure of untouchable authority, felt a subtle unease whenever Lyra, the blind Omega, passed through the halls. Her presence was like a shadow of truth he could not escape, and it unsettled him more than any rival or threat ever had. Lyra, meanwhile, navigated the palace with a confidence that belied her blindness. She walked along the stone corridors, hand lightly brushing against the walls, her other hand often outstretched to sense the rhythm of the space around her. She knew the palace's secrets better than many who had spent their lives within its walls. Servants whispered their admiration as she passed, not only for her grace but for her insight. She listened to every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every murmur in the distant halls, understanding more than sight could ever reveal. The king observed her from the shadows of his private chambers. He had summoned her again, this time under the pretense of explaining the palace's rules and rituals, but in truth, he found himself drawn to her presence. There was a dangerous fascination in watching her move, a curiosity that no crown, no throne, no army had ever sparked. For decades he had been feared, admired, and obeyed. But now he was challenged in ways that words alone could not capture. "You move through this place as if it belongs to you," the king said, stepping from the shadows. His cloak swept the floor as he approached, and Lyra turned her face toward him, her pale eyes unseeing but somehow sensing him. "I move as one who listens," she replied. "The palace speaks if one knows how to hear." He studied her carefully, noting the calm authority in her voice. "And what does it say to you?" "That even the strongest walls have cracks," she said softly. "Even the mightiest rulers have fears, and even a throne built on power alone cannot hide loneliness." The king frowned, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his stern features. He had ruled this kingdom for decades, yet no one had ever perceived the silent weight of his crown. Few had dared to speak of it, and fewer still with such clarity. Lyra, however, did not speak to flatter him. She spoke to see him, to know him, and he felt exposed in a way that made him both wary and intrigued. "You are dangerous," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You see too much, and yet you fear nothing." "I fear only deceit," she replied, "and hiding the truth. That is the greatest danger of all." A faint smile flickered across the king's lips. He had spent a lifetime wielding power, yet this woman had none, and yet she held him in a tension he had never felt. Her defiance was not reckless. It was deliberate, quiet, and profoundly disarming. Days turned into nights, and the palace seemed to shrink around the two of them. Lyra began to sense the hidden parts of the king's world, the secret chambers filled with ancient tomes, the hallways lined with portraits of rulers long gone, the faint magic lingering in the air that bound the palace and its inhabitants together. She spoke little of these discoveries, yet her presence alone began to awaken something in the king, a sense that the palace was not just stone and tradition, but alive in ways he had never acknowledged. One evening, under the pale glow of a full moon, the king found Lyra in the gardens. The fountains shimmered silver, and the night air carried the scent of roses and damp stone. She was seated on a low bench, fingers brushing the petals of a flower, listening to the water ripple in the fountain. "You understand much for someone who cannot see," he said, stepping closer. "It unnerves me." "I see with more than eyes," Lyra replied. "I see with the mind, the heart, and the soul, and I feel what others cannot." He stood beside her, silent for a moment, watching her face. There was a serenity in her presence, a stillness that belied the storm she had stirred within him. He had ruled by fear, by strength, by cunning, but she had shown him another way: honesty, courage, and vulnerability. "Do you understand what it means to be king?" he asked quietly, as if speaking the words aloud might shatter the delicate tension between them. "I do," she said softly. "It means carrying a burden that few can see. It means making decisions that weigh on the soul. It means standing alone even when surrounded by thousands." The king nodded slowly. "And yet, you do not fear me." "Fear serves no purpose in understanding," she replied, "and you are not cruel. You are burdened, and that is not the same." He exhaled slowly, a rare sound in the grand palace where control and silence were law. He felt the stirrings of something he had not known in years: trust, curiosity, and the dangerous pull of admiration for someone unafraid to see him truly. As the days passed, their connection deepened. Lyra learned the rhythms of the palace, the secrets hidden behind locked doors, and the subtle magic that lingered in the stones and tapestries. She discovered a library filled with ancient texts, forbidden knowledge of curses and old pacts that had bound the Alpha King's ancestors. She spoke little of what she learned, but her awareness of these secrets made the king both wary and protective. The courtiers, however, noticed the shift. Whispers spread like wildfire. The blind Omega had entered the king's private chambers, and he seemed changed. Some feared her, claiming she was using some unknown power to influence him. Others were curious, wondering if she held the key to the king's heart. Murmurs of curses and old prophecies began to resurface, hints of ancient magic tied to the Alpha bloodline, suggesting that any woman who touched the king deeply could awaken forces long thought dormant. Lyra, unaware of all the whispers, focused only on the truth she saw in the king. She understood his loneliness, his need for connection, and his desire for someone who could see beyond the crown. And she too felt a strange pull toward him, not of fear, not of ambition, but of understanding and recognition. One night, a sudden chill ran through the gardens as Lyra walked alone. The wind stirred the leaves, carrying a whisper she could not identify. She stopped, sensing a presence, but heard no footsteps. Her hand reached for the wall of the fountain, fingers tracing the stone, searching for the rhythm of the world around her. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a rival from the court, seeking to warn her away or intimidate her. Lyra's hand brushed the smooth edge of a marble statue, and she straightened her posture, meeting the figure with calm confidence. "Leave now," she said softly, her voice steady. "I do not wish conflict." The figure hesitated, surprised by her composure. "You cannot remain here," he said. "You do not belong. The king will not—" Before he could finish, the Alpha King appeared, stepping silently from the shadows. His presence filled the garden like a storm, commanding and undeniable. The rival froze, unsure whether to flee or stand. "You should leave," the king said, his voice low and lethal. "She belongs here as much as any born to this court. And if you threaten her, you threaten me." The rival bowed quickly, retreating into the darkness, leaving the king and Lyra alone. She reached out instinctively, her hand brushing against his chest. A warmth spread from her touch, something more than simple contact, a connection, subtle but undeniable. The king's dark eyes widened, and for a brief moment he felt powerless, unguarded, and very human. You cannot feel this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Lyra's smile was faint but knowing. "Perhaps I can. Perhaps we both can, if we dare to accept it." The night wrapped around them, silver and quiet, and the palace seemed to hold its breath. Two hearts met in shadow and light, in courage and curiosity, in defiance and recognition. The king had faced armies, enemies, and betrayal, but nothing had challenged him like the blind Omega who dared to see him fully. And though neither spoke the words aloud, both knew the story between them was only beginning, and the threads of destiny had already begun to weave a tapestry neither could escape. The palace remained silent, but the shadows whispered of change, of secrets yet to be revealed, and of a bond that could shift the balance of power, heart, and fate itself. The palace seemed colder now, as if the walls themselves had grown wary of Lyra's presence. Whispers and sideways glances followed her at every turn, murmurs of discontent rising among the courtiers. Some spoke in hushed tones of prophecy and curses, others of fear and jealousy. They could not comprehend how a blind Omega had unsettled the Alpha King in ways no noblewoman or warrior ever had. The very air of the palace seemed charged with tension, as though it waited for the inevitable storm. The king walked through the grand hall, cloak sweeping the marble floors, every footstep measured and precise. His eyes, usually impenetrable and commanding, now carried an undercurrent of thoughtfulness and unease. For the first time he found himself considering the opinions of others, not because he feared them, but because he feared the fragility of the connection he had begun to feel with Lyra. Lyra moved beside him in the quiet of the hall. Her white hair shimmered under the torchlight, and though her eyes could not see, she sensed every detail, the subtle shifts in the king's weight, the cadence of his steps, the silent warnings of servants passing nearby. "You seem distracted," she said softly, her voice gentle but unyielding. "The palace whispers of discontent. It worries you?" The king's lips tightened. "It does, and it should. The court is like a storm waiting for wind. Every whisper carries weight, every glance carries suspicion. And yet it is not them I fear, it is the risk of allowing someone to see me as you do." Lyra tilted her head, listening to the underlying tremor in his voice. "Then you fear vulnerability," she said simply. "Not me, not the court, but the truth of yourself. You fear that if someone sees the man beneath the crown, he might not survive the judgment of the world." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. For a moment they stood in silence, two souls aware of the fragility of the moment. "You speak with certainty," he said. "It is rare. Most are afraid to speak truths to me, even in whispers. You do not fear me." "I fear only deceit," Lyra said, "and I cannot bow to what is not honest. That is all." He regarded her quietly, as if trying to measure the depth of her courage. For decades he had ruled with absolute authority, teaching his subjects to obey, fear, or flatter him. Yet here was a woman who wielded no power but truth, and it unsettled him profoundly. The tension in the court grew with each passing day. Whispers turned into rumors, rumors into schemes. Some nobles began to question the king's judgment, wondering aloud why he allowed a blind Omega such influence, why he spent time with her privately, why he seemed changed. The king, who had anticipated threats from armies, rebellion, and foreign intrigue, now faced a challenge far subtler and far more dangerous: the court itself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched long across the palace, Lyra found herself in the library, listening to the murmurs of the walls and the faint rustle of parchment. She had discovered an ancient text, a book bound in midnight blue leather and etched with symbols that pulsed faintly with a dormant magic. though she could not read it with sight. She sensed the energy emanating from it, a story of a king, a chosen Omega, and the forces that could awaken or destroy a kingdom. The king appeared silently behind her, as he often did, observing rather than interrupting. He sensed her focus, her patience, her delicate strength in the face of something far older than either of them. "You found something," he said softly, voice carrying the weight of curiosity and concern. Lyra did not startle, though she knew he was there. "It is an old record," she said. "It speaks of a bond between an Alpha King and a chosen Omega. The Omega sees what the King cannot, guides him, and in return the King protects and respects her. It warns of jealousy, betrayal, and those who fear such a connection." The King's expression darkened, his mind racing. "And you believe it applies to us?" "I do not know," she said honestly, "but the echoes of it feel familiar. As though the past is alive in this palace, waiting to remind those who forget the cost of ignoring truth." He knelt beside her, closer than he had ever been before. "You speak carefully, yet not falsely." "That is dangerous," Lyra smiled faintly. "Truth is always dangerous to those who hide behind lies." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden clatter from the hall. Guards rushed past, whispers turning to exclamations. The court had gathered, rumors of the king's unusual attachment to Lyra spreading like wildfire. Some sought to confront her directly, others merely to watch the reactions of the king. The king rose swiftly, cloak swirling, and moved to intercept the approaching nobles. "Stay behind me," he said to Lyra. "Do not fear. They will test you, but they cannot touch you while I stand here." Lyra followed, silent, trusting. She had never relied on protection before. Yet beside him she felt an unfamiliar safety, a shield forged not in fear, but in mutual respect. The nobles arrived, faces tight with suspicion and ambition. "King," one of them said, voice edged with challenge, "it has come to our attention that you favor a blind Omega over those who have served this court faithfully. We demand to know why this irregularity persists." The king's gaze swept across the room, landing finally on Lyra. Her posture remained calm, her voice steady, though her senses caught every subtle movement, every threat. "She is not favored for beauty, or blood or obedience," he said slowly, deliberately. "She is unlike any who have come before. She challenges me, sees me, and compels me to be something better." "That is reason enough." Gasps echoed through the hall. Some nobles reddened with anger, others with awe. Few had heard the king speak with such honesty. "You risk the stability of this court," another cried. "Do you not see what this could provoke? Do you not fear the consequences?" The king's eyes darkened. "I fear only those who would punish honesty with treachery. And make no mistake, I will not allow fear to rule my judgment nor to rule this palace." The nobles faltered, caught between outrage and admiration, while Lyra stepped forward, her presence calm and unwavering. "I do not seek to disrupt the court," she said. "I seek only to be seen for who I am, and to see the truth in those who wield power. That is all." The hall fell silent again, the words settling like dust on stone. Even the most ambitious nobles hesitated, sensing the weight of her courage and the king's resolve. Later, when the court had dispersed, the king and Lyra returned to the gardens. Moonlight cast silver streaks over the fountains and paths. He stood close yet careful, unsure how much to reveal, how much to allow himself to feel. "They test you because they fear what they cannot control," he said quietly, "and I fear what I am beginning to feel." Lyra reached out, her hand brushing against his sleeve. "What is it you fear?" she asked softly. "Not you," he said almost to himself. "Not the bond we share, but the power it gives, the responsibility, and the vulnerability. For the first time I am not in control and it terrifies me." "You are only human," she said gently, "and that is why they fear you. You do not need to hide it from me." He exhaled, a long, slow breath, feeling the weight of centuries lift slightly in her presence. "And yet I cannot ignore the court. They will test us again, and next time—" "They may not retreat," Lyra nodded. "Then we prepare. Not with fear, but with courage. We cannot hide the truth, but we can stand together and face what comes." The king looked at her, shadows and moonlight dancing across his face. "You have changed everything," he said, "and I do not know if I am ready for what comes next." Lyra smiled faintly, her voice calm yet carrying a quiet strength that resonated with him. "Then we take it one step at a time, King, step by step together." A distant howl echoed through the palace grounds, carried on the night wind. It was a reminder that the world beyond the gardens remained dangerous, that the court's whispers could turn into schemes, and that the balance of power, heart, and destiny had begun to shift. The king and the blind Omega stood side by side, two souls entwined in defiance and recognition, aware that the trials to come would test courage, loyalty, and the very truths they held dear. And as the moonlight painted the palace in silver shadows, neither could deny it. The next moment could change everything, for both of them, and for the kingdom itself. Dawn broke over the palace in streaks of gold and rose, painting the towers and gardens in a fragile light. The air was still, carrying the scent of dew and the faint whisper of past nights, of secrets kept and promises unspoken. Within the grand halls, tension hung thick, a reminder that the court's whispers had not vanished but had grown louder, sharper, and more dangerous. The Alpha King paced in his private chambers, cloak dragging across the polished floors. His mind churned with strategies, with concern for the palace, and most unsettlingly, with thoughts of Lyra. For weeks she had remained by his side, fearless, insightful, and unyielding. She had unsettled him more than any army or conspiracy ever had, and yet he felt powerless in the face of her calm courage. The door opened softly. Lyra entered, her presence gentle yet undeniable, the faint rustle of her robes echoing in the quiet room. She did not need to see him to know the storm in his mind. She moved with awareness, each step deliberate, each breath attuned to the rhythm of the palace around them. "You are restless," she said softly. "The court whispers reach even these walls, and it seems you are weighed down not by fear, but by the burden of truth." The king turned to her, dark eyes troubled, yet filled with admiration. "You have changed everything, Lyra. I have ruled this kingdom with power, with cunning, and with solitude. Yet your presence, it makes me question every certainty I've ever held. I am not sure if I am ready for what comes." "You are stronger than you believe," she said. "And you do not face this alone. We face it together. Always." He regarded her silently, the weight of his crown pressing against the fragile thread of courage and trust she had helped him weave. "The court will test us again," he said. "They do not understand what they see, and fear drives them, and I fear what they may do to protect their own ambitions." Lyra moved closer, her hand brushing lightly against his. "Then we prepare, not with fear but with clarity. They cannot break what is rooted in truth." The king's gaze softened, and for a moment the armor he had worn for decades, the cold mask of power, the unyielding authority, seemed to fall away. He was no longer just the Alpha King. He was a man capable of wonder, awe, and connection, and in that moment he realized that the bond between them was more than curiosity, more than defiance. It was trust, recognition, and a promise of something greater than either could name. That evening, the court gathered for the king's private audience. The nobles entered cautiously, aware of the tension, unsure of how the king would act in the presence of the blind Omega who had stirred his heart. Lyra walked beside him, steady and unafraid, the soft light of torches glinting off her pale hair, her presence commanding the attention of all. The murmurs rose to whispers, whispers to silent unease as the king stepped forward. "You have watched, you have judged, and you have doubted," he said, voice resonant and clear. "You have tried to test her, to diminish her, and to question my judgment. But know this, she is not here to serve you, nor to bend to your expectations. She is here to stand for truth, courage, and the bond that guides this kingdom beyond fear." The court fell silent. No one dared to speak as the king continued, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of authority tempered by admiration. "Lyra has proven herself, not by obedience, not by flattery, not by tradition, but by honesty, insight, and the strength to face me and the world as she is. And I choose to honor that strength, for it is the foundation of this kingdom's future." A nobleman stepped forward, attempting to challenge him. "Your Majesty, tradition is not always wisdom," the king interrupted, voice sharp but steady. "And those who cling to it without understanding will fall behind. We move forward, guided not by fear or power, but by truth and courage. Lyra has shown that. I honor her for it, and all who serve this court should do the same." The hall remained quiet, the tension slowly giving way to a strange respect. The king's words carried authority, yes, but also something deeper, an acknowledgement of a bond forged not in fear, but in understanding. Lyra, standing beside him, felt the shift in the room, the acknowledgement of her presence and her courage. She did not need to see it. She felt it resonating through the air, through the stones, through the unspoken magic of the palace. After the court dispersed, the king led her to the gardens. Moonlight glimmered on the fountains, the petals of night-blooming flowers glistening with dew. He stood close, hesitant yet compelled, as though the pull between them defied reason. "You have changed the palace and me," he admitted softly, voice carrying both wonder and vulnerability. "I have never known companionship like this, never trust like this. And yet I do not regret it." Lyra's hand found his, fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of his cloak. "Nor do I," she said. "We have faced the whispers, the tests, the shadows, and still we remain, not because of fear or obligation, but because we are true to ourselves and to each other." A silence followed, the kind that holds worlds in balance. The king gazed at her, aware of the fragility of the moment, the weight of centuries of power, and the new path that lay ahead. "You are unlike any woman I have known, fearless, wise, and impossible to ignore. And you," she said, "are unlike any man I have encountered, strong, commanding, yet capable of seeing beyond yourself when someone dares to show you the truth." The night carried their words like a gentle wind, weaving them into the tapestry of the palace, the gardens, and the kingdom itself. They were not just king and Omega. They were two souls entwined, a bond that defied fear, expectation, and tradition. Suddenly, a soft rustle in the garden caught their attention. The court spies had not abandoned their schemes entirely, and though none dared approach openly, the palace still held shadows that moved with intent. The king drew a deep breath, his hand tightening around hers. "Whatever comes next, we face it together, not as ruler and subject, but as equals, as partners, as something greater than titles can hold." Lyra nodded, her voice calm but resolute. "Together, always." The night stretched around them, the moon casting silver light on fountains, pathways, and statues. They walked side by side, hand in hand, sensing each other's presence, drawing strength from the bond that had been forged through courage, defiance, and truth. Every shadow that had once loomed over them now seemed smaller, diminished by the light of their connection. In the days that followed, the court's whispers quieted, replaced by cautious admiration. Nobles and servants alike began to recognize that the blind Omega's presence was not a threat, but a reflection of strength, insight, and honor. The Alpha King, once isolated by fear and power, now walked with purpose and trust, guided by the woman who had dared to defy him with nothing but truth. Together, they explored the palace and its secrets, learning, observing, and shaping the kingdom in ways that neither tradition nor fear could dictate. Lyra's insight revealed hidden passages, long-forgotten histories, and subtle magic that had lain dormant, waiting for one who could see beyond appearances. The king, in turn, found courage to confront his own vulnerabilities, to make decisions not only as a ruler, but as a man capable of empathy, trust, and genuine connection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the gardens in hues of gold and violet, the king turned to Lyra. His voice was low, carrying the weight of realization and wonder. "You have shown me a world I never knew existed, a world beyond fear, beyond power, beyond titles, and I choose it. I choose you." Lyra's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "And I choose you," she said. "Not the crown, not the power, not the expectations, but the man who dares to see, to feel, and to honor truth." The night wrapped around them, the palace silent in awe, as two hearts met fully, unafraid and unbound. They had faced whispers, tests, and shadows, yet they remained, stronger, wiser, and bound by a connection that no fear could undo. In that moment, the Alpha King and the blind Omega stood together, not as ruler and subject, not as legend and outsider, but as equals, as partners, as something far greater than any title or crown could convey. And though the world would continue to test them, they knew one truth above all: their bond, forged in courage and honesty, could withstand any shadow, any whisper, any threat. The palace, once a place of fear and control, now held the echo of their courage and the promise of a future shaped not by power alone, but by trust, connection, and the unyielding strength of hearts that dared to see and be seen.